So today we're going to talk about, in general terms, sexual harassment, most particularly a bunch of sexual harassment cases or sexual misconduct cases that have been coming up frequently in the last, several months. Or I guess it's kind of been snowballing into more and more over the last few years, hasn't it?
Yeah.
According to Time magazine, this is being called the Me Too movement.
Yeah, the Me Too women, I guess, are picked as the Time Magazine People of the Year, that somehow they're the most newsworthy or impactful because on social media and otherwise women are coming forward talking about their experiences with sexual abuse or rape or whatever. And then their accusers have met certain consequences. People like Kevin Spacey have lost deals in Hollywood, or like Senator Al Franken resigned today. So
Yeah. So I don't know much about those cases in particular, but were they accused or were they convicted of a crime? Or in those cases, I guess
there's
we'll start.
no
Go.
conviction in a courtroom. No.
Okay. And have either one of them had an admission of guilt, like in public?
I think that there's an admission of, I remember something like that happening, but my memory might be slightly different from yours.
Okay. Yeah. I guess before we get too deep into this, maybe we should preface this with, obviously, this is a very, very sensitive topic, but that's one reason why we are talking about it, is because since it is so sensitive, it's important to talk about it. And as you said earlier, before we went live, that perhaps people don't want to hear about this from two white guys, but here we are. So obviously any kind of sexual misconduct or sexual assault, rape, or is bad. Definitely among the worst things a human can do is committing rape. I'd say just shy of torture and murder. Actually, I'd say rape is a kind of torture. Would you agree?
Yeah.
So basically you're torturing somebody when you rape them. But we're talking about rape, and then we're talking about sexual misconduct. And I think it's very important to determine the difference between those two things. I think a lot of people hear these terms and think bad is bad, they should be punished no matter what. And they're just like the scum of the earth if they hear about some kind of sexual misconduct case. I feel like if the word sexual gets thrown out, a lot of people just get really fired up right away and just want that person condemned in every possible way. And I agree that sexual misconduct is very, very bad, but I think people kind of attribute rape to that immediately without really digging deep into figuring out, hey, there's different levels. If you steal a pack of gum from a store versus if you rob a bank, you're looking at very, very different charges pressed against you. Very, very different punishments involved, right?
Right.
But technically, they're both theft.
Yeah.
I guess, you could say, well, no, one's armed robbery. Well, yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make. One is shoplifting, petty theft, and one is armed robbery, which is felony. So I think that it's very important to understand that some of these cases have some, I don't want to say gray area because it makes it sound like it's okay to do that in certain situations, because it's not. I just want to make it clear that there's a very big difference between rape and sexual misconduct.
It seemed like you seemed to get something out of comparing rape to other crimes. But I would almost argue that in the social consciousness, rape is not just a sensitive issue, it's a taboo issue that people don't want to talk about. Related to that, it seems like rape is almost mystical, in that rape is put in a whole separate category of criminal activity, human activity. I've been told recently that because I haven't been raped, I'm not allowed to talk about rape or rape victims because there's no way I could possibly understand.
Well, okay, so I think most people would call that a bit over the top, but just in case there are people out there who don't see that as over the top and agree with that, well, do you think that a male should never talk about pregnancy just because it's impossible for a male to get pregnant? And I think that there's a big difference between talking about something and claiming to understand something. So I have heard some guys before say something along the lines of perhaps they're talking to a pregnant woman and saying, and maybe she's complaining or in pain, maybe the baby's kicking and it hurts, or is nauseous with morning sickness, and then the guy goes, I know how you feel, you know, I've thrown up before, like tough it out. And go, okay, no, you don't know how that feels. In fact, if you did, you would be the biggest scientific breakthrough. You cannot know what it feels like to be pregnant. But does that mean that men are not allowed to talk about pregnancy at all? About any aspect of it? No, of course we cannot understand what it feels like. There's no possible sympathy there.
I still think that there's something mystical about rape that no
in
one
the
has
sense
ever
that it's
told me that I can't talk about someone being mugged, like physically abused. I've never died before, and yet no one's ever corrected me when I've pontificated about murder or killing someone. That I have these assumptions that I'm bringing to the table when I'm saying, hey, you shouldn't kill this person. But I've never died. What do I know?
so
But no one's ever told me that I can't possibly understand what it's like to die. They have told me I don't know what it's like to be raped. Like it's this thing, it's this magical experience that transforms you into a different kind of human being that all non-raped human beings cannot possibly relate to.
I think that there is something to go along with the whole idea of sympathy versus empathy in that context. However, I agree with the whole taboo idea, whereas I feel like whenever the topic of rape gets brought up, if you are not condemning the accused rapist, then all of a sudden you become a bad person. And that you're not allowed to try and play devil's advocate or work out the problem or anything. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a defense lawyer of somebody who was accused of rape.
I don't know why, in order to talk about rape, I have to start off by saying rape is bad.
Yeah, that's true. And obviously that is an instinct we have, because that's how I started this conversation, right? That was an instinct of mine. I wanted to make sure that the water was clear and everybody knew that rape was bad. But that's true. I think that is, like you said, a taboo in our society. And I think that more so than any other topic is one where you really have to be careful. And I don't know if that's for a good reason or not. Why do you think that reason is?
Well, so there's the sexual aspect of rape, but the thing is, as far as I understand our study of the psychology of rapists, that it's not actually about sex. It's about control or something to that effect. We have this taboo associated with it because sex in general is taboo. It's sensational. It makes headlines. But when it comes to a rapist's motives, it's about domination. And I don't know why that has to necessarily be explicitly sexual. I guess I don't quite understand why, like I can contemplate someone having their body physically abused, their arm broken, their leg attacked, their head pounded in, like all of these things. But if the abuse happens to a vagina, then it's somehow sacredly different.
So I think one big difference is when you talk about physical abuse that is not sexual or not in a private area of the body, I guess. I think one big issue is, okay, if you get physically assaulted, there's a less likely chance that you would feel any sort of public humiliation about that. Maybe your pride would be hurt a little bit if you like lost a fight, or you feel like you're inferior in some way on a power level, perhaps. But I think on the scale of being raped or being sexually assaulted, if you have to claim I was sexually assaulted, there's a certain amount of shame and embarrassment that comes along with that. And I don't think it should. I think that is how our society has almost grown this concept of rape. I think that is the root of a lot of these other problems with women not coming out about being raped, or men for that matter as well. In fact, we can talk. Yeah.
So I think that it's the taboo itself that causes the shame. It's how we have to talk about rape in hushed tones. And so these people who seem to be big defenders of the sexually abused, when they hush, my voice because I've not been raped, they're just making it that much harder for us to talk about it and that much more shameful for a victim of these kinds of crimes to come forward. I don't really understand why we have to treat abuse of a vagina that differently from the abuse of any other body part.
Yeah, and
It's painful. It's you feel out of control. Like these are all horrible things.
being assaulted and taken advantage of in such an aggressive physical manner should not be something you're ashamed of. This is something that happens to you. So whether it happens to you in any sort of sexual way or whether it's just a non-sexual, simply physical way.
These crimes don't reflect on you, right? They reflect on the other
Yeah,
person, your environment, other things like that.
in the past, people would say a woman's virginity is a sacred thing. And I know in a lot of religions, a woman's virginity is a sacred thing. So if they are raped and say their virginity is taken away, they are somehow tainted. And that is something to be ashamed of.
And I think it's that mysticism of the virginity, that virginity is sacred, that seems really absurd to me.
This is tedious because I know a lot of religions find virginity sacred, but I'll also say that I think a lot of the times the weight is on the shoulders of the woman in
Right.
most cases.
Right.
You know, if a man decides I'm going to go against my religion and have sex before marriage, it's not nearly as frowned upon as when a woman does it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a shame that we consider it a shame, or that people consider it a shame when a woman lost her virginity, whether it was, I was going to say willfully or not, but I guess that depends on religious beliefs and whatever. In the context of rape, I think that should never have been something that a woman was held accountable for, ever. Right. I mean, why? This is a crime that has been committed to a person. They should not take any sort of punishment for that whatsoever, whether it is public shame or lack of support from their religious group or anything else. And I think, I hope anyway, that at least in regards to religious groups, that if somebody came forward to their religious group and claimed they were raped, that they would have their full support regardless of if their virginity was stripped from them or not.
Do you think that one of the things that makes rape potentially different is that there's a possible mixture of pleasure, like sexual pleasure, that is really confusing?
So
that's been suggested to me as one of the reasons why rape is different.
Rape is different because say for example, a man rapes a woman and she was accused of taking pleasure in the act of the raping. Is that what you're saying? Or that
it's just really confusing to her if the action feels physically pleasurable, even though it's very emotionally damaging and she feels out of control. Like it's a very confusing mixture of pleasure and pain that makes it so traumatic, as opposed to more run-of-the-mill physical abuse.
Okay, so wow, this is really, really hard to wrap my mind around. I see where you're going, but I just want to make sure that this is as clear as possible.
I'm not sure that's my belief. That's just something that's been suggested to me as to why rape is different.
Yeah.
Because sex is supposed to be pleasurable, and so when you turn it into this also very negative experience, it's very confusing and traumatic for the victim.
Yeah, so I know of some stories where women have been raped, and out of all the stories that I've heard, not a single one has ever said that there was any aspect of it that felt good physically or otherwise. Yeah. That being said, everybody's different. There's different scenarios. If you're touching a stimulated area, regardless of whether you're afraid or not, there might be some sort of pleasurable sensation. That's how the human body's supposed to work. However, what I do know of, even with the women that I've talked to who had been raped before and said it was the single most horrible thing that's ever happened to them, that their sexual life henceforth changed forever.
Yeah.
And so it's not just physically scarring or emotionally scarring. I don't know if I can include psychologically scarring, but it completely crushes their libido.
But is that really that surprising? Like, couldn't you see if someone had like a childhood experience where their hand was in a whole lot of pain, and so anytime they use that hand to, I don't know, play baseball or something, it brought up that memory, and so they never really could get over the trauma of what happened to their hand.
Yeah, but I also think it has to do with how they view the gender as a whole in society. Perhaps if they were raped by a man, it might make them fearful of men as like a psychological defense mechanism or something.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this becomes something to be afraid of.
So getting back to the Me Too situation, I guess the reason why I wanted to point out how rape seems different from other crimes is that there seems to be this taboo, this like belief that some people have that rape is worse than murder. Somehow to be raped is it would have been better if they just killed you or something. It's that horrible of an experience. I guess people who believe that advocate for suicidal responses of rape victims or something. But
well, okay, and are the people who are saying this, have they been raped before? Because I know a lot of rape victims. Well, okay, I don't know a lot of rape victims. I know some rape victims, and they currently are leading happy lives, and I'm sure they're happy to be alive.
Right. I'm of the opinion that basically whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and that I know that, you know, people can experience really, really horrible things, and yet human beings tend to be pretty resilient, and you can have your family and your home destroyed by living in a war-torn part of the world, and you can go on to live a very good life. So the human ability to respond to tragedy, I've not really found the limit to that. So I don't think rape has to be the end of your life.
Yeah, I agree. And I also don't think it's something that you should be ashamed of. Anybody should be ashamed of. And I do think that the reason why there is that shame is from everything we've talked about, with that's a cultural thing we developed. And by not talking about it and by making it a taboo, all we're doing is we're making it harder for the victims, because then it makes it more difficult for them to come out and talk about it. And think about how much harm could have been saved. Let's say there's somebody out there who's a sexual offender who has performed misconduct, and these women are afraid to say anything about it because they feel like they'll be shamed in public view, or for whatever reason of taboo associated with this, they don't say anything about it until 10 years later. Well, that's really not good for several reasons, but the number one reason, in my opinion, is that if that person isn't confronted about their sexual misconduct, they might continue to do it. So you're creating more victims by not speaking out against it.
Yeah.
I think it's the responsibility of the victim to come out and say something about it so that the perpetrator can be dealt with. However, if society is making it that hard for the victims to come out, because this isn't just this happened a few times kind of thing where there's been a few harassment or whatever that are afraid to come out due to embarrassment. This is almost an epidemic where so many cases of sexual misconduct are never brought up and the victims never come forth about it. So I think that this is definitely on society's shoulders, on just the general population's shoulders, be open to talk about it and shatter this idea of it being taboo. Because until that happens, I feel like the victims are always going to feel that sense of shame and be afraid to come forward.
Yeah. But I think it's because of that taboo. I think society recognizes that it's hard for these victims to come forward. And because, we made a boo-boo and we've accidentally made this crime so sensational that no one actually wants to talk about it. So that when people do come forward and talk about it, even if it's 30 years later, it seems to me it's the only crime where you're guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah, that's true. And that goes back to my question is, were these people accused or were they convicted? Because
nobody's convicted. This is all, something like Netflix or social media or something attacking these people until they lose their jobs or something. And to me, that's the scariest thing about it, is that because we've made it something that we can't talk about, we've got ourselves in this double bind where if a woman does come forward to talk about it, we feel bad because, we've cast all these women aside, but then we just destroy someone's life without any proof because we said, well, there's no way that they would endure all the shame that we put on them, so they must be speaking the truth. And the whole conversation, like, it's offensive for me even to say, I thought people were innocent until proven guilty, because the way that the Me Too people phrase it is, if you don't think that this person is guilty until proven innocent, then what you're doing is you're questioning, you're calling the victims liars.
Right.
That's how it's posed, which I guess I've never thought of that in any other crime. A couple Christmases ago, I had my apartment broken into and they stole, I don't know, $1,000 worth of stuff. And when I went to the police, I made a report. And I didn't really think that when I made the report that because I was having to like show evidence that there was a break-in and things were missing, etc. I didn't think that in that moment they called me a liar, right? I'm the victim of a crime and I'm bringing it forward in court. And the fact that the court, had I known who stole it from me and then I was bringing it up against them or something, just because the court says, hey, until the trial is finished, we're going to treat this person as innocent, I don't think that that means that the court says I'm a liar, right? Like the court is taking me seriously enough that they're allowing me to spend time in court. So
yes.
So I don't know why, in general, we can't say, oh, so many women have come forward against this guy, but because he hasn't been convicted in court, I'm going to treat him as innocent. And they're saying, oh, you're calling all those women liars. I'm like, no, I can believe them while still treating him like he's innocent until proven guilty. Like, I don't know why you have to pick one or the other.
Right.
Can it be, I believe both of you until we sort it out in court. I believe both of you are innocent, honest, good people until we determine all the facts and a judge or a jury decides one way or the other.
Which is how it should be in our country anyway. That's why we have this whole thing called due process.
But it seems like rape is the exception of due process.
It does seem that way. There really is a stigma that is just making it harder and harder, and it's almost snowballing, as you were saying earlier, about how we have this taboo against talking about it, and since we know we have a taboo against talking about it, we try and be hush-hush about it, but then when we actually have a victim, we sympathize with the victim, and then that creates new problems, and it makes it even harder to talk about, and the cycle just keeps continuing on and on and on, and the snowball keeps becoming bigger and bigger.
If you were accused of rape, how would you defend yourself?
If I was accused of rape, how would I defend myself?
Yeah.
Well, I can already imagine just losing my job, just being accused. I mean, I'm a school teacher. I can imagine just all of the kids' parents just freaking out that there's a potential rapist at their school, and I'd probably lose my job over it. And that's just being accused. So, I would defend myself and say something like, I will happily go to court to defend my case and do whatever necessary to prove my innocence. I guess I would say that, even though, that idea terrifies me because of how many mistrials there have been in U.S. history. I mean, there's countless people who've been convicted of murder who never harmed a fly in their life. And, some of these cases are getting overturned after they've been in jail for 20 years. I don't want my life ruined just because somebody claims something crazy about me one day.
But isn't that the general premise of innocent until proven guilty? That we think it's better for guilty people to get away with crimes than for an innocent person to serve time for a crime they never committed.
Right. So it's to protect people from misconception, right? So
it just seems to me like we recognize that the law isn't perfect. So if we're going to err on any side, we're going to err on not punishing people than punishing people who don't deserve it.
Yeah. And I think that's a very good system we have in place. And I'm really glad you brought up that example, because that's a great reason. Because if I'm innocent and I lose everything, I can't get that back. I would never be able to get my job back, even though I did absolutely nothing wrong. So this whole stigma that we have of, like you said, guilty until proven innocent is a huge problem. And we should not have that sort of public shaming, even if they are found guilty eventually. After they're found guilty, publicly shame them all you want. All right. But until that point, we should not have that sort of guilty until proven innocent kind of mentality.
It just seems to me that the taboo doesn't help anybody. It destroys.
It doesn't help anybody.
It destroys the accused lives, and it isolates or silences the victims.
It isolates and silences the victims, so that way the perpetrator for years and years and years, and it creates this potential for innocent people to be accused of something and have their lives ruined.
So even if it's not popular for people to hear from us our thoughts on sexual assault or something, it seems like at least the fact that we're making an effort to have a real conversation about it could potentially remove some of the stigma, start conversations for other people to have.
Yeah. So hopefully next time we get a chance to talk about this, we can get more in depth about specific cases that have been arising lately and more about the Me Too movement, or the Me Too women, sorry, and really get into the nitty gritty of this without having to these reservations. At least I feel like it's necessary to preface that, even though I know that that is kind of becoming part of the problem. So I'd really like to break through that. I'm glad we talked about this taboo thing, and hopefully from there we can move forward and really just address more of the specifics and really dig deep into this problem some more on another cast sometime.